Good morning, or good afternoon, evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome, everyone. My name is Hélène Chartier. I'm the Director of Urban Planning and Design at C40, and I'm delighted to host this session today. I'm also delighted to be with Kjetil Thorsen Trædal, please correct me if I'm wrong, to discuss how we can decarbonize the built environment and harness a model of urban development that is more sustainable and resilient for our future. Kjetil is the director and co-founder of the famous Norwegian architectural practice Snøhetta. Since the creation of Snøhetta, Kjetil has been leading the development of key projects, including the beautiful National Opera in Oslo, the San Francisco's MoMA, the National September 11 Memorial Pavilion in New York, and a very inspiring energy-positive building in Trondheim, Norway recently. Kjetil, we know that climate change is becoming more and more real every day. All over the world, we are witnessing an increase in climate disaster, and the latest IPCC report warns us of a possible tipping point, from which the climate transition could become not gradual, but sudden and irrevocable. The leading climate scientists are now very clear: to avoid a climate catastrophe, the global emission must peak before 2025 and be reduced by half by 2030. It is therefore an absolute priority to act and to cut emissions from the sector most responsible for the climate crisis. And the built environment industry has a huge responsibility. Buildings account for nearly 50% of annual CO2 emissions, and the global building floor area is expected to double by 2060, which represents the equivalent of adding a new entire New York City to the world every month for the coming 40 years. Kjetil, my first question for you is simple. How, as an architect, do you react to this? How the climate crisis is transforming the way you are practicing architecture?
Oh my God. There are really so many levels of reaction that we need to implement in the profession of architecture for the moment. But let me start with one of them, which I think is extremely important, is the collaboration between different professions to actually get in-depth sight and understanding the real issues at hand when designing, when planning and building new buildings, urban environments. I think the crucial element here is to acknowledge the fact, then share the information, share the knowledge, and then implement it by testing out buildings, physical surroundings where you can actually deal with the tasks at hand. That includes obviously using existing buildings to an absolute maximum extent. Every time you build something new, you shouldn't move away from the actual core of the CO2 issues, including all the embodied elements of CO2, including transport, production lines, consumption, and recycling of a building in the end. So all of these things come together as a massive, let's say, challenge for our industry. And of course, if I may, at the end, mention the fact that we are up against legal aspects in the building industry that need to be changed. Many of them are results of industries having lobbied their way into legal aspects for years and years. And for the moment, we really have to stand up and say, no, the research basis for many of these things that we encounter as comfort zones, as climate control in buildings, are no longer valuable. We have to expand and see how we can use simpler means of getting where we want to get, and by that also really challenging the large elements of the industry.
Thank you, Kjetil. You mentioned the need of testing through pilot project and everything. And recently, Snøhetta, through your leadership, has won the C40 Reinventing Cities competition with an impressive project in Milan. It's called Aria. It will be the first carbon negative neighborhood in the city. Could you please tell us more about this project? How did you design this specific project?
Ex Marcello is really the old slaughter district of Milan. It's just east of the center of Milan, and it's in many ways a very strange thing to be turning a slaughterhouse into a green neighborhood, right? But I also love this contradiction in its historical content and its future content. But let me just say here, we take everything into consideration, starting with biodiversity, looking at the green areas that need to be implemented, looking at the existing structures and really carefully analyzing which structures can be kept, which can be rebuilt, which can be added on. So it's a multidisciplinary kind of approach with a lot of people involved in this project, which of course also increases the basic knowledge of the team and makes it possible for us to calculate every building material in its inherent CO2 footprint, makes it possible for us to look at what does a clean and CO2-free building site look like, what does the consumption of energy look like in the future, and how do we actually build this into the understanding for the next generation with green spaces, social spaces that are at the same time resilient and CO2 free. But then again, we need neighborhoods to take on this responsibility. Singular objects no longer do the job. And I think this is why this particular project is so great for us, is that it gives us the opportunity to look at the capacity of each object in a larger constellation of things. And these constellations actually give us the possibility of reacting as a group of buildings, as an ensemble of buildings, and by that reacting more specifically to the neighborhood itself, and CO2-free or even maybe negative, which we're trying to achieve here, especially through the planting. Maybe it's too slow, I have to say. Maybe it's a little bit too slow, but our calculations show at least that we will reach neutrality within a very short period of time. Not the least because a lot of the CO2 embedded in the existing building structures are already written off. This is CO2 already in the atmosphere. So we have to make sure that now we only do what is needed, nothing more, some sort of reductionist way of looking at architecture, but at the same time, making sure that we don't differentiate between the different parts of the world where places where they have nothing and where they live on $1 a day are not being torn down and looked upon in the same way as the Western world. So yes, we have to show by good examples. I think Ex Marcello is one. And I think we'll see when we start measuring the results, when this is final and finally built, I think we will actually see that it is possible today with existing technologies to actually reach at least CO2 neutrality.
It's very inspiring. And I have to say something, you mentioned the neighborhood level, but something what was quite impressive in this project that you produce more energy than the neighborhood will need. Actually, you even try to be energy positive to provide energy to the rest of the city. So you could also compensate a part of the embodied emission, even if you reduce the embodied emission with low carbon material, reuse of existing building and everything, you try to have this very wide approach of carbon emission reduction, which was very, very, very impressive.
Yeah, I think there's producing more clean and renewable energy than you consume within the neighborhood is extremely important. That's the only way you can actually pay back the
Exactly.
CO2 faster, by using and replacing and sort of contributing to a different electricity mix that is being used by others. Let's say for bicycles, buses, cars, you can even use it as pure electricity into your neighborhoods outside of Ex Marcello. But I think energy positive neighborhoods today are actually a must. And it's not so hard to achieve. And it's not even so expensive to achieve, So I feel it feels strange why not everyone's doing it.
And it's very also interesting the way you explain that basically you have used this project and probably other to train yourself, but also all of the large consortium you are working with to put the carbon emission as a central element of the decision making in the project. And I'm doing a comparison of I'm working with cities to see how cities can reduce their emission. And there is a project that comes from Oslo, where you come from, the climate budgeting project of the city of Oslo, who have really decided to calculate every decision that the city do, to calculate it as a budget, as a financial budget. So each time the city do a decision, they identify how much CO2 this will create or reduce, and they try to, align their decision regarding not only the budget and the social consideration, but the CO2 emission as really a key element. And I think that's very interesting, because in each of the field, as a designer, as a leader of a cities, and every different business, that's really the change of mindset we need to operate now, and that's very inspiring.
Yes, it is. In fact, I think we need to go a little bit away from being, let's say, passive negative. There is a huge challenge in front of us, but we don't give up, right? So we have to somehow say, okay, this is possible. Get more people on board, get more people to do the right things in the right sequence, and then at least we can make a difference. Because like you said earlier, the building industry is really an enormous producer of CO2. And of course, there are certain materials here that are, which we'll have to deal with in the future. For instance, concrete. I mean, we cannot get rid of the concrete, right? So we have to find another way of producing concrete. And I think these are the issues that I'm not sure if I could say that they actually make me sort of positive in mind, but at least there are options here. The whole crisis should be dealt with as the COVID crisis. We should put all the research we have into this situation and make sure that we establish a certain level of understanding, which is at the level of the crisis that we're looking at. And I don't understand why still, although there is an increase in awareness around the world, it's still not high enough. We need to fight this corner, and in some way it is a fight. Look at investors who are still neglecting this fact. Look at builders who say, okay, it's fun to do an experiment, but for our main building, for the next building, we'll just go back to the old, because we make more money or whatever. And I think this budget that Oslo is dealing with should also come with a price tag. You should really cost people who are willing to produce more CO2 than necessary. It should cost them something, also in a smaller urban scale. And now we're expanding this all the way into the file structures that we're looking at. Even our new web page will be looking at how can we reduce the CO2 footprint of the web page. In every aspect of the profession, you need to go in, you need to look at things, and you need to be sure that you can defend your position. Because early 2019, for our sake, we said by 2029, we shall have only CO2 neutral minimum buildings on our drawing table. In 39, we shall have only such under construction. It's very ambitious, but of course we're not relying only on ourselves, we're also relying on the world around us. But still, I find it ambitious, and it takes a lot of hard work, because we are working in many places around the world, right? From the Middle East, where the consumption per capita is still enormous when it comes to oil, gas production. I'm myself coming from a country where the wealth of Norway and given me the possibility of being here up in the mountains and actually having a sort of beautiful couple of days picking berries in the mountains, right? So, we have to be really careful. What is the quality of the things that we're producing, and then put it back into context. If it's not relevant, if it's not doing the right thing, don't do it. I think that.
Yeah, great. No, it's very interesting also, because it's make me think of what you said already about this idea of we should build only when we need to build. And there is, where I am based in Paris, there is a lot of discussions these days about, is that okay to continue to build at this rate? There is recently a report to say that 8% of the housing in France are vacant, and 10% of an additional 10% are for second home. So in this mindset of reacting in an emergency mode, as we have done during the COVID, some people say, okay, we need to find a good technology, transform our practice, but should we also include some sobriety aspect in this approach? And as you have done in Ex Machillo, the first thing you said with the project, saying we look at all of the existing building to make sure we can not demolish them, reusing them. But how do you react with this sobriety approach of course it's complicated as an architect who is living from it.
Yes, and you're touching upon a very sore point, obviously, and even amongst my own colleagues, there will be people who say, this really doesn't matter. There will even be people who say, if I design something that can last for 400 years, it's already environmentally sound. No, it's not true. The only thing that is true about that is that in 400 years, you still have the same building, but the CO2 footprint of the building might still be today as dangerous as any other building. So in the end, I find the discussions really not lifted to the right level yet.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe part of the problem, is that we haven't really been able to find the right vocabulary. I think it's a lot about words, in fact, and action, obviously. But before we can do the right kind of action, we also need to find the right kinds of definitions of the things that we need to be doing. So right now, there is a huge aspect of definitions that sometimes lead into a greenwashing kind of perception of things. The same words might be absolutely real for someone else, who then gets told that you're greenwashing because they're using the same words, although the content is really correct. So I don't find we have a language yet that actually describes where we should be going and how we should actually react. And maybe part of the studies and the research that we're doing for the moment should also slowly move into the scientific aspects, because architecture is so much about feelings, right? And I understand that. And my architecture is also a lot about feelings and how do you perceive and what is beauty? What is the aesthetics of these things? But there is no contradiction between doing environmentally friendly, CO2 neutral buildings and a sort of beautiful house or a beautiful neighborhood. There are no contradictions here. There might be certain aspects of contemporary aesthetics that we might need to change in our own mind. We cannot build buildings like we did 1810, 20, 30, 1890, because they will never, ever become CO2 friendly. But we can use elements of, let's say, deep human aesthetics and implement it into also quite solid and new urban developments. And I think that's partially what we're trying to do with Ex Machillo, is to create something that is recognizable, that will last for a long time, say 400 years, but at the same time takes the current situation on the CO2 and biodiversity seriously and really addresses the points also as a mathematical model down to the millimeter. And I think we need to be there.
Yeah, this is very interesting also what you just said about the fact that we need to build building that will last, because actually that's the best way of reducing emission. There is so many, actually most of the buildings that are being demolished are not demolished because they have structural problem, but most of these buildings are demolished because they have a specific aesthetic, or their aesthetic or their organization does not fit anymore with the need. So how does that affect as well as an architect, knowing that you are developing a project that should last for 400 years and not the business as usual 50 years and with this terrible circle of demolition, reconstruction, demolition, reconstruction?
This is what I mentioned earlier, right? So in the choice of materials that you go for, the building industry today is based on a 30-year plus plan, right? So it's called the 30-year lifespan. That's in accordance to the payback of the investment of the building. So in theory, we should look far beyond the payback of the investment when we create buildings. The writing off of taxes and the way you invest in buildings should be changed. You should be given a sort of certificate of design lifespan of buildings and structures, which would then maybe even help you to look at the client side of things for them actually to make their money in a different way. Long-term investments spanning, let's say, if not for the moment 400 years, but at least 100 years, at least 100 years. And by doing that, parts of the building legislations that we see around the world would also have to change.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So one thing is connected to the other. And for us to be able to operate in our profession as architects in the future, we also need help from the politicians, because they also describe certain directions of things. We know, and you know, that if we have a research result, it can take up to 6 years before that enters into building codes, right? 6 years. Let's say that's the normal distance between a research result and the implementation of a code. That is too slow.
Yeah.
So now we've suggested to the city of Oslo that we have a building code free zone for experimenting with the elements that actually are dealing specifically with the environment. And I do believe this could be a way forward, because we need measurable results, tangible results. That's the only way we can convince the next client.
This is very, very interesting. I would love to hear more about this free building code and how this will lead to the good result, like thinking about the goal more than the methodology and the process. This is very, very important. Another thing, I think, as a designer, you are, as an architect, you are not only, building a box or a building or a neighborhood. You're also creating a space where the people will live. And in that sense, you have a part of responsibility to help people, empower people to live also a little bit a different life. We know that today that imported emission, the consumption-based emission, is so important, and they have been totally underestimated in the past. So it's really, we need also to empower, to work with the people so they can adjust their way of living. How do you integrate that in your project?
Well, it's what I touched upon a little bit earlier, but I think for now, we really need to be discussing our comfort zones. I'm seeing a tendency of moving into half climatized zones in the architecture, for instance. We're seeing lower consumption on energy when it comes to semi-climatized zones only. And we believe that they are now calculated fully into the maximum building area of a building. I see also the transition between indoor and outdoor as something that is happening not logically. For the moment, I think in the Western world, we're spending more than 90% of our lives indoor, right? That, of course, tells you already something about the indoor energy consumption.
Yeah,
so let's say and out of these 90%, we spend 14% in the bathroom. And you can, every bathroom in the world, almost in the Western world, almost start having cables. These are the spaces that are normally much too warm. So, in effect, the personal footprint that we're dealing with should be dealing with semi-climatized zones, transitions between indoor and outdoor, bringing people outside to get more fresh air, which helps everyone. And at the same time, recognizing the fact that what our surroundings look like actually matter to me. Can I still see nature? Can I still see a tree? That actually does matter. It matters within my head and in relationship to my psyche. It matters. And these are the kind of things we have to be aware of. So in the future, I'm hoping that we can talk more about these things than only about this is ugly, this is pretty. I'm really hoping to have a shift in the debate and in the focus of these things. But architectural profession is still a result of its education. So we have to start with this. we have to start with the students.
And it's very interesting what you say, because I remember one of your fellow architect, David Chipperfield, saying, the built environment is great to innovate, but not for the good reason. And I think in your case, from what you just explained, I think you have transformed that, and really you say, I need to innovate, but really for what really matters. And that's very, very, very inspiring. Maybe a last question for you, and you are starting mentioning this idea of the relationship with nature. Of course, after the COVID, there is, a need for people to be closer to nature, but also we know now that, of course, we want people to stay in cities. City is the most sustainable way of living, but at the same time, people must be safe in cities. And with the climate crisis that we know will affect the cities, we know that bringing back nature in cities is one of our best tools to develop more resilient cities and everything. How do you integrate nature in your project? How do you think we can really increase permeable surfaces, green zone in the city to really also develop more resilient urban areas?
Well, first of all, we need to reduce inner city car traffic, right?
Yeah.
Because the spaces that we today see in inner parts of the cities are hard surfaces, mainly there because of cars and car transport.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, we do need some for walkable cities. We do need some for bicycling cities. But, the big areas in a city that are either for car transport or for persons or for others is enormous. So that's why, for the moment, I think to be able to densify green areas in cities, we really have to look at how much space in the future should a car take. And that means we will probably discover that we have far too much space in cities, even for today's traffic, right? What if we organize the traffic better? What if we use technology to know exactly where you can drive when? Where can you put the car? How is public transport organized in order for me to have a very easy way going from home to work? How will the shopping sort of happen in the future? Where do you go? Where do you park? We still find clients who have a narrow road, 6 meters wide, going down to 2,000 parking spaces.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. You know what I'm saying? If you have 2,000 parking spaces, it should be like a motorway running into that in order for it to operate. So we have these bottlenecks all over. And as long as the cities work with these bottlenecks, they would also work without the bottle.
Mm.
And I think that's something we have to really work hard on in the future is area use, not start building on agricultural land. We did a calculation on the CO2 content of, say, 300-year-old agricultural soil, the 40 centimeters that you have. If you take like 30 generations, 40 generations, and look at the input that's gone into creating this fertile soil for us to grow the carrots and the potatoes, the CO2 content of that is enormous. That's why you cannot use that soil for anything else. And I think these are all consequences of how you think. Densifying the green areas in cities, they are also very, very good in carbon capture.
Yeah, exactly.
So they actually do contribute. They are excellent in local pollution. And of course, in addition, they give you the shadow in the places where you need shadow in the cities. So we don't need all this artificial stuff that generates shadow. So there are so many parallel elements that we should be looking at. And I'm not saying it should all come easy, and it won't come easy, but at least we should work on it very hard. We should densify green in cities. Every time there is a cubic meter of earth free, put a plant, put a tree, put something there.
The mayor of Paris has just decided to remove 50% of the parking space in the public space. And basically they start explaining, of course, because we need to reduce pollution and everything. And they shift a little bit the narrative, saying, actually, what we will win, what will you win if we remove this space? And basically they say it's going to be 120 hectares, and they say it's 6 times the size of the Jardin du Luxembourg in Paris. So just explaining this way as well, that it's not just about fighting climate change and pollution, which is very important, but it's also about, you know, creating an environment where people can win things. So it's also this very
and that's where we need to make sure that the offering by doing that is as a comparison for people who live outside and can still drive to the big shopping centers outside of Paris, that they understand that the value of doing that is more than the value of driving the car to the shopping center.
Exactly.
And I think that is probably going to happen with the next generation. I'm hopeful, but it takes time.
Yeah. I think we are I think we could discuss like that for hours, but I'm conscious of the time, and it was a real pleasure to discuss with you, Kjetil. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And see you soon.
And see you very soon.